My name's Kathay Feng, and I'm with California Common Cause. And who's heard of Common Cause? Okay, just checking. There are rooms where sometimes I have to explain who we are. Let me just back up a little bit and say this. What is Common Cause's approach, and how is it the same or different from any of my other panelists? What I would say is that the very nature of our organization, of our name, is that we're trying to build something bigger. And that means that sometimes there may be many different approaches to getting to the same ends, and it doesn't benefit us to try to parse those differences. Because what are we up against? I don't have $1 million. I don't have $100,000 to spend. I don't even have $1,000 to give. Sorry if there's anybody running for an office. And so my voice doesn't have that same level of amplification as the person who has $1 million to give, or in some cases, 14 million, 28 million, 100 million. The only way that I have a chance of changing that is if I combine forces with everybody in this room and everybody in rooms like this around the country where people are pissed off about what the Supreme Court has said and want to make a change to reestablish that our democracy is about the voice of people and not about the amplification that money gives you, right? And so what does that mean? It means that sometimes there may be a little bit of difference between what your strategy is and what your strategy is, but collectively, if we allow the forces that represent the Koch brothers or other moneyed interests to split us apart, we'll always be silenced, right? The democracy movement depends on us coming together. So what does Common Cause do? We look for opportunities to bring divergent strands where our goal is the same into one movement. And that's ultimately what it is. We love public financing. We support the 28th Amendment. We support disclosure laws. At the local level, we're pushing for city councils to pass resolutions. In California, we've got over 50 cities that have already passed resolutions to instruct their congressional members to vote for a constitutional amendment, right? So at many different levels, we're pushing for this kind of change. And for us, it isn't one solution or another. This June and November, we're gonna be out there doing election protection because it's just as important to make sure that people are not turned away because of the color of their skin or because of a judgment about whether you vote the same as I do. And it's really important to see that as a spectrum of issues that all play into the same answer, which is, what should our democracy be based on? Is it based on we the people, which is an inclusive concept, or is it based on a few who have control, as you pointed out, Daniel, an oligarchy, right? And if you believe that it should be an inclusive democracy, then we have to fight on all different fronts. We have to support all of those efforts similarly. And so I just want to talk about some additional things without at all demeaning what other people have talked about, because we absolutely support the 28th Amendment. We were actually the force behind writing the Montana version that got passed in Montana and California. We have a resolution that got passed through legislation, through the legislature, and certainly in many, many cities around California. I'm really proud to say that, in Los Angeles, we pushed for Prop C, and Los Angeles voters actually got a chance to vote, and 75% of voters came out and said, yeah, we want this constitutional amendment. That's huge. And I'm pretty sure that even in Los Angeles, 75% aren't all one party. So that means that we managed to convince the people who are not just Democrats. So that's really huge. Let me talk about two other things. Public financing, I mentioned that. So in Los Angeles City, we actually have a fairly robust public financing system that's getting more robust. So every time the Supreme Court comes out with one of their crappy decisions taking away another piece of public financing, we say, oh yeah, well, we're gonna up the match from 1-to-1 to 6-to-1 now, and we're about to go there, right? We're gonna up the amount of money that a candidate who chooses to receive public financing is gonna get. And what we've seen is this, slowly, in small ways, we're already seeing candidates change their behavior. They are fundraising less from outside of the county, less from outside of the city. It used to be almost half of their money came from outside of the county. And now they're raising much more from within the city. They're raising less from large donors and more from small donors. And the other thing that's really interesting is that we're starting to see some change in behavior where the candidates who do the best job of knocking on doors and doing local constituent contact, that good old-fashioned idea of knocking on doors and talking to neighbors, they're actually winning. So hooray for public financing, because that's putting the power back into residents' hands. And we've actually snuck in, and I don't know if the city council realizes this, so we have this provision now that says that matching funds will only go to donations that come from Los Angeles residents and voters. And what does that mean? It means that it's local, but it also means in order to be a resident and a voter, you've got to be somebody who bleeds blood. You're no longer a corporation or a union or some entity that's a non-human being, right? That means that you've got to be a resident or a voter. So I think that there are some possibilities for us then to take that to the national level. So what am I going to talk about? There's a little flyer that was going around, Government by the People Act. It's actually a bill by John Sarbanes from Maryland. And it's absolutely true that this Congress is not about to pass this bill. But I think what this is an effort to take some of the best ideas from different public financing systems around the country and say, why don't we have a public financing system for our Congress, right? And as Jessica Levinson said, it takes a Watergate to pass major legislation. I guarantee you that we've already seen 4 senators go down in California. We're about to see some major scandals happen at the national level. And when that opportunity happens, because the national attention is focused on what we can do to address the problem of money in politics, because it has become, so egregious, that I think that people will start to look at many solutions. So this one I just want to put in front of you. It's HR 20. It's interesting because it's got the public financing piece that many of you will be familiar with, right? It's matching funds. But then it's also got this other piece that says if you give $50, that you get a tax deduction that doubles that amount so that you get a tax deduction of $100. It lets a voter sort of have a skin in their game, and sort of also says to Republicans, hey, you want tax credits, right? Well, come on board. This doesn't have to be a partisan issue. This is really something where if you believe that many electeds got into the job with good intentions to represent some nobler cause, that somewhere along the way, the process of having to constantly fundraise is what corrupts them, then maybe we can take that out of the equation and get them back to doing the thing that they originally got into it for, which is representing the people. So I just want to put this before you, and if you want to write a little letter or support John Sarbanes' act, it's nice for him to hear that California cares about these issues. The last piece is just disclosure. So we'll talk about this on the next panel about California versions of bills that are talking about disclosure, but there's still the federal one. What I just want to comment is this. It seems like it's so obvious, like just knowing where the money comes from has always been, I thought, the default for both Democrats and Republicans to say, okay, for Republicans who don't like public financing, we don't like that, and we don't like the amendment idea, but disclosure, fine. What we're already seeing is a huge amount of pushback against even disclosure, craziness. So what I would say is these many different tools are really important, and you can't ignore one for the other. They're part of an arsenal that you're going to need to fight against a pretty big opponent. And so one of the things that I would ask everybody to think about is, as you think about possible solutions that you want to support, you can focus your efforts on some things, but if your friend or your neighbor picks up another idea, be supportive of that. Embrace the idea that our movement has to be large, big tent, because that's what democracy is about. Thanks.